mitzvah of shofar. So we know what Rambam says very clearly about what shofar is for. It's in some Sidurim. Here's what you do. Ur Yeshenim. First, it's a Xeris HaKasuv. And then you say it has actually a lesson. Rabbi Bar-Hayim is a lot about Rosh Hashanah is the day where, the king has to go see his troops. It's basically like they do in more monarchical countries. Like the Queen of England on her birthday. How do they celebrate her birthday back in England? They have a whole big military parade. That's the whole thing. Everybody has to show up and salute and stuff. It's one big thing. So that's basically the idea around here. If the king is coming to check the troops, so they sound the horn, and all the troops have to line up and be evaluated. That's the basic idea behind Rosh Hashanah, the way we understand it from Chazal. I'll give a mashal. Kriyat Shema is, what is Kriyat Shema? The declaration of faith. Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And the first chapter of Kriyat Shema talks about how one has to constantly study the Torah. Bind it to your arms, write it down on your mezuzahs. That's what the first chapter is about. The second chapter is about the concept of reward and punishment, the consequences. Keeping the Torah gives you the reward. Not keeping the Torah is the punishment. And that's why you have to study Torah constantly. And the third chapter, which apparently added by Chazal, talks about remembering all the commandments constantly, the mitzvah tzitzit, and also remembering the Exodus, the basis for what we do. And then you see that Chazal couched this biblical commandment in a rabbinic commandment. It's basically the shell around this biblical commandment. What is it, the rabbinic commandment that accompanies Kriyat Shema? The brachot, before and after. So there's brachot beforehand. The first bracha is basically the bracha of creation. Yotzei Meroth. Every day we say that we are acknowledging that God, who is the creator of everything, also has, so to speak, renews the creation every day. Now, when you think about that, that's an important point. Why? It's not so clear in the Torah that that's what it says. That's not something you could read the Torah and say. You could have read the Torah and said, clockmaker's universe, God created the world, and then rested. And now he doesn't get involved in affairs, or maybe he doesn't do anything that needs. Perhaps the universe just runs now, like the clock, without his intervention. And by the way, once upon a time in the classical era, there were major philosophical streams that believed this, Gentile streams, and it might have influenced Jewish streams. So you can understand why it is the sages would have ordained that we recite this blessing every morning before Kriyat Shema, that we affirm that we believe that God renews creation every single day. Very important point that we might miss. The second one is about the Jewish exceptionalism. God has chosen us. We are beloved by God. We are his chosen people. We study the Torah. And there's a connection, an unbreakable, eternal connection between us and God. That's not something you find in Shema necessarily. And you can understand why. Once again, in Chazal's times, in the classical times, there were major streams, especially among Gentiles, that what? Or the Jews are not exceptional, or even rejected chas v'sholom. The people who repudiated, let's say, Jewish exceptionalism, that was Maccabean times. That was what the Misyavnim and their Yevanim who were trying to persecute the Jews basically believed. There's nothing special about Judaism. You should try to be assimilation, etc. And then a few hundred years later, you have the early Christians who were basically usurping the Jewish people's chosenness. The Christians are now the chosen one. They replace the replacement theology we mentioned last week in passing. So you understand why these brachas are there. The third bracha, Gal Yisrael, is talking about the past, how God, because he loves us and because we keep the Torah, etc., has redeemed us throughout history and will redeem us in the future. And at night, there's another bracha about guarding, but basically the night brachas are along similar themes, but a little bit shorter, but it's basically the same thing. So now, we'll review. The mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, the Doraisa mitzvah, is couched in this rabbinic affirmation also. The rabbis attached more to say to Shema. And that's also important theological points that have to be made and Jews have to affirm. So too with the shofar. The shofar, on its most basic level, is, let's say, as the Rambam and other Rishonim describe, it's a wake-up. There's the 10 kavanas of Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon, right? You can see it. They put in the machzors and everything. The shofar reminds you of this, or reminds you of that, Har Sinai, etc. I like the Art Scroll has it nice in English right before the sounding of the shofar. They publish it in these kuntrasim beforehand. It's wonderful. and that is the shofar itself. But what did the sages do with the shofar? The sound of the shofar they also couched in brachot. What is that? The malchios, zichronos, and shofaros. I remember speaking to Rabbi Bar-Hayim a few years ago. Uh, it says in the Yerushalmi basically that the sounding of the shofar was done earlier in the morning. It was attached to Shachris, not Musaf. You guys heard of that? Okay, it used to be, and you know why they stopped? Apparently, this is in the Byzantine era. In the Byzantine era, they stopped. Why? Because they, when do Jews daven Shmon Esrei? It's Vasikin, just at sunrise. So that means before sunrise, they're already gathering in the synagogues. And it seems that on Rosh Hashanah there wasn't this whole Chazaras Hashat, the silent Shmon Esrei and Chazaras Hashatz. Often it was just the shots. The Shliach Tzibur saying the whole thing out loud for everybody because they didn't have Machzorim. The text of the prayers with Balchios, Zechonos, and Shofros is most people don't know it by heart. Do you know it by heart? So I've been Shliach Tzibur a few years now, so maybe I could. I don't feel confident to know it by heart, but I'm saying it out loud multiple times every year. So it's kind of hard. It's not like the weekday Shmon Esrei, or even just the Shmon Esrei of a regular holiday. So it was already they're saying Malchios, Zechonos, and Shofars in the morning with their sounding the shofar, right? Right at sunrise basically, and they were attacked. Basically, the Byzantine occupiers. That was the Eastern Roman Empire after switched to the East. Don't forget that also early Christianity. They fell on the Jews. They attacked them. So they realized, okay, so we'll defer the sounding of the shofar to Musaf. What did it look like? How did exactly their shachris look? When did they say the bracha on sounding the shofar back in the day? In the old system, before they instituted that we sound the shofar after shachris the first time and then as part of Musaf. Okay, up in the air. Should we go back to the way it was done?
I would argue so.
Okay, well, it's kind of hard.
Well, yeah, no, but same thing with the Valet Sion. The Valet Sion is normally in Shacharim. And
yeah.
Now it's in Mincha Shabbat.
Okay.
There's a reason for that. It's the same reason. They didn't want us to say to say Valet Sion because it means that will return.
Yeah. So you can understand we're trying to go back to things, but to what extent should we go back? Either way, let's assume things are the way they are. Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros are connected to, according to Rabbi Akiva, and this is the thing I sent into the group. You notice Rabbi Akiva is connecting three central korbanos of the regalim to the sounding of the shofar. These are all sacrificial rituals that the sectarians back in the day repudiated. The first is the Omer on Chol Hamoed Pesach. According to the Karaite reading, which follows let's say the Sadducee reading, back in the day, the Omer isn't on Passover specifically. It's on the Mocharat Shabbat. It's on a certain Sunday, apparently after Passover. So, like Chazal said, when they used to do this reaping of the Omer on Motzei Pesach, the second night of Pesach, when we start counting the Omer, they did a whole ritual to show that we are not doing like those Sadducees. The Sadducees would deny this. Sages talk about how there was a holiday, it's in Megillus Tainis. The Sadducees used to impose their way of understanding the counting of the Omer on the Jewish people. Why? Because the counting of Omer also affects what? If they count the Omer after we count the Omer, it's not in sync. It means their holiday of Shavuot will also not coincide with ours. Their Shavuot was always on a Sunday, which means that they felt that the bringing of the Lechem Bikurim, the special sacrifice of Shavuot, was also done not when we say it should be done. And then there was Nisuch HaMayim. They totally deny Nisuch HaMayim. That's the offering of Sukkot. They deny that. And Rabbi Akiva says, and by the way, God says, sound the shofar and say Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros for this point. You know that since ancient times, the sectarians have denied Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, that's a surprise. What do you mean? It says on the 1st of Tishrei, the 1st of the 7th month is Yom Teruah, Yom Zichron Teruah. So, as the sages point out, it's not so clear, it's not mukhrach, that when it says Teruah, it means the Teruah of the shofar. It could just mean screaming or crying out. Yeah, and which is what the Karaites to this day say. So the fact that the Jews sounded the shofar specifically as a commandment, remember, shofar was something they did all the time. It says, remember, they did trumpets were a more common thing. Oh, two Joshes. Oh, okay. You could wash hamotzi. There's still some pizza. It's nice and hot. Okay, and also when you're done, unplug the blech there. You see that's in there. So this is something that the Sadducees still deny. The Karaites still deny that Rosh Hashanah is what we say it is, as a day of judgment, etc. So you see, Rabbi Akiva is lumping all these things that the sectarians deny, and we don't deny, and we're affirming them. And that's why we say Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros is basically our scouring the written record, the corpus of the Torah, for biblical proofs as to what we say Rosh Hashanah is all about. So yes, there's the basic level of sounding the shofar according to the Torah, and there's also a rabbinic level of affirming all these other beliefs. Remember, the shofar is about belief in God. It's like Kriyas Shema squared, Kabbalah Olachut Shemaim, but even more so. Okay, so what the sages gave us is just like Kriyat Shema is surrounded by other affirmations of faith, that God continues the creation of the world every single day, renews the creation, that God loves the Jewish people and they are exceptional, and that God has redeemed us and will redeem us, which are all things that the groups were denying back then. So too, when we sound the shofar, we also tack on, by the way, we believe this day is about God's coronation, accepting him as king. We believe that today is the day when all people are judged. That's what Zichronot is about. That you could easily say, I read the Bible like a Sadducee or a Karaite, and I don't see that there. The Christians certainly, they have taken control of not control, they've taken possession of our scriptures. They've usurped it and tried to read their own nonsense into scripture, and they don't see this. And the significance of the shofar oath also. What does the shofar accomplish is something that we describe in our prayers. So that's basically how we understand what we're supposed to do. So I hope this will improve your prayers on Rosh Hashanah.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.